Hello, it's Robert here. Well, I want to say a good evening to you and look forward to sharing a few of the gems with you that I've enjoyed looking over my collection, my country collection. I've been collecting over 40 years, taking me a while to get some things that are fairly obscure, but I enjoy sharing them with you and I love the music so much. As I mentioned before, my collection zeroes in on from the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, early 60s. There are some in the late 60s. I collect Merle Haggard. In the 80s, I liked Dwight Yoakam, but it's a lot less from that time. My collection leans heavily towards those earlier years. Right now in the background, I have playing this album. It's from '63 of Stonewall Jackson. I love a song. It was the album that Don't Be Angry was released on, and that's what's playing as we speak. So I wanted to share with you some others. This is an album that came out in the late 50s on the King label. Hawkshaw Hawkins, Volume 2, featured Doghouse Boogie, his version of Call Elijah, All Because of My Jealous Heart, Life Lost Its Color. So a good album featuring those 40s and the early 50s recordings of Hawkshaw Hawkins. Staying with King, there's another one, songs by the Delmore Brothers, featuring Freight Train Boogie, Blues Stay Away From Me, Browns Ferry Blues, Hillbilly Boogie, a number of others. This is the second cover. This is not the first cover on this King release from the late 50s. But the Delmore Brothers had made many fine recordings in the 30s, but in the 40s they sort of picked up the tempo. They started doing a lot of boogie and bluesy numbers. They used Wayne Rainey on harmonica. They beefed up their sound with the electric guitar, usually from Zeke or Zeb Turner, and they made a lot of fine records for King, and this is one of the album releases. Then from around 58, 59 came this album, The Spectacular Johnny Horton. This was released during his life and featured the Battle of New Orleans, Whispering Pines, Winter Springtime in Alaska, All for the Love of a Girl, The Golden Rocket, Mr. Moonlight, and others. That's the same picture that's on Johnny Horton's Greatest Hits. But this is a very fine album, The Spectacular Johnny Horton. Also from King's earlier LP releases was Grandpa Jones, sings his greatest hits. Grandpa Jones' finest work was probably for the King people, especially in the late 40s, very early 50s. Has a nice version of Send In Your Name and Address, 8 More Miles to Louisville, his version of Mountain Dew, I'm On Grandpa, all these were on here. And then another from the King people was this one, I'll Still Write Your Name in the Sand, the Maddox Brothers and Rose. Now, some of the artists that recorded for Four Star, they had LPs released of that material on King. And for some of them, the King releases overdubbed the early Four Star recordings. Maddox Brothers and Rose, they did not. So these are the real, legitimate things of I'll Still Write Your Name in the Sand, Hangover Blues, I Want to Live in Love, Meanest Man in Town, Shimmy Shakin' Daddy, and others. Nice album release of them. And then my favorite artist has always been Hank Snow, and this is his first instrumental album. This came out in the mid-50s, featured 12th Street Rag and Rainbow Boogie, Madison Madness, his version of Bayou Candias, and he made other instrumental albums. Hank Snow was a very fine guitarist, but the other albums were made in the 60s, his instrumental albums, and they tended to feature Nashville sound productions of that time, but this was back in the days when he just used his Rainbow Ranch Boys, giving a little more simple backing, and so you can really hear more of his fine guitar work. And then we have songs by Don Gibson. Now this featured his mid-50s MGM recordings of Sweet Dreams, Run Boy, I Ain't Gonna Waste My Time, and others. It's on the Lion label, which the Lion was subsidiary of MGM. Very tough album to get, but that's what it features of those 55, 56 recordings he made for MGM. And then a nice release from the 80s. This was Roy Acuff, Columbia Historic Edition. Columbia Historic Edition released a number of artists and original mono recordings, such as Carl Smith, Leon McAuliffe, Gene Autry, Bob Wills, Lefty Frizzell, Flatt and Scruggs, and others. Some of the earlier ones were 10-song releases. This is very nice. It was a 16-song release with Streamline, Cannonball, and Low and Lonely, the version of Wabash Cannonball from 1937, When I Lay My Burdens Down, and others. Going back to the late 20s, 30s, Grayson and Witter. George Grayson was a blind fiddle player, but some of their early recordings of 9 Pound Hammer, Joking Henry, What Do I Do with the Baby O, Short Life of Trouble, they set the stage for a lot of bluegrass versions of those songs later. These were some of the first versions of those numbers which have become very popular. One of the most popular numbers was the Lee Highway Blues, or Going Down the Lee Highway. That was on a county compilation album. But these are nice recordings of Grayson. He was a good singer, actually. It could sound a little rough a little bit, but it was actually pretty good singing. Henry Witter being his guitar backup. Next, there's Flat on Victor, Lester Flatt. And when Flatt and Scruggs split in 1969, Lester Flatt made a couple albums for other labels, but it seemed like his sound really gelled and really picked up again. He revitalized himself when he signed with RCA in 1970, and made about 8 albums for them. 3 of them were duet albums with Mac Wiseman. This was the first album, Flat on Victor, made in 1970. It even featured some of the Foggy Mountain Boys, such as Buck Graves and Paul Warren and Jake Tulloch were on this album, along with Haskell McCormick on the banjo, Roland White on the mandolin. I Can Tell the Boys from the Girls, or I Can't Tell the Boys from the Girls, was perhaps the more popular one of this album. And then next is Frankie Miller, old honky-tonk country singer from the 50s. This was his first release on the Starday label. He had recorded for other labels earlier. These are very tough to get. Any of his albums really are. One on Audio Lab, and there's 3 on Starday. Any of them are very, very difficult to find. This one, of course, featured Blackland Farmer, which was the hit at the time. It's good to take a listen to the song Tornado. It sounds like Wayne Rainey playing a harmonica for him on that, but very nice recording. Has an ominous sound to it. Very good by Frankie Miller. And then on the Starday label, going with that, we have Robert Lund, who was a popular Grand Ole Opry performer through the 40s and the 50s. Made a couple singles for Mercury back in the 40s. And then that was about all he recorded, except in an album around 61 or 2 for the Starday people. And his signature tune was Talkin' Blues, which he also does on here. But he has nice backing with it. He has the Smoky Mountain Boys are backing him up. And they give more of a little minimal backing, so you really get a good chance to hear some of his numbers. And it's a very enjoyable listen of Robert Lund. Then next is Patsy Cline. This is her 3rd LP for Decca. And it's the last one during her lifetime. This was in 62. The hit off of here was She's Got You, but also her versions of Lonely Street and You Belong to Me, Half as Much. It's a very nice album of hers. And going back to Starday, another very difficult album to find, which came out around 64, of Jerry Rivers. Jerry Rivers, of course, played fiddle for Hank Williams in the early 50s. And he goes through a number of different fiddle styles, such as Cajun and bluegrass and Western swing on here, and he does narration. And it's actually very interesting to listen to the fantastic fiddling and tall tales of Jerry Rivers. And then we have, from 1963, The Wonderful World of Bluegrass Music, of Bill Harrell. Bill Harrell had made a couple singles for Starday in the late 50s. And then in 1963, for United Artists, came this album. A little bit popular version of I Dipped in the Sugar Bowl is on here. Buck Ryan and Smitty Irvin were in his band as fiddle and banjo player. And he was also featured on the Jimmy Dean TV show. So he had a good bit of exposure. And this is a very nice album of his going back to that era. And then I wanted to share just a couple more of 10-inch albums with you. Then, as I mentioned before, over the years, they seem to have been the toughest things that I have been able to try to get. I've only gotten around a little over 20, I have, and there's probably another 15 or so I'd like to get. They're very tough to get. When you do get them, when you do see one, they're usually just beat up so bad, so to get one in decent shape has been very difficult. But here's a few more. This is a Roy Acuff release from '49. Songs of Smoky Mountains. which featured Wreck on the Highway, Fireball Mail, Freight Train Blues, Wabash Cannonball. This was a very early country 10-inch release. And then Chet Atkins. There was 2 releases of Chet Atkins. This was one of them, Galloping Guitar, which featured that number along with Black Mountain Rag and St. Louis Blues and others, again, back from the early 50s. So it's back in that era of Chet Atkins, and recordings have more liveliness to them than what you would hear of him in later years. And then finally, I have one of Eddie Arnold, Country Classics, which features his 40s recordings, A Bouquet of Roses, It's a Sin, That's How Much I Love You, I Hold You in My Heart, Anytime. So a nice album of his 40s recordings on this. And then finally, this is an album of 78, came out in 48. And this is a Jack Guthrie memorial album. Jack Guthrie was a fairly popular country singer in the 40s, around 45, 6, and 7. Had a big hit with Oklahoma Hills, another one with Okie Boogie. Had a very simplistic sound. The only 12-inch release in the U.S. on him was in the 60s on Capitol, and stay away from that album. It is overdubbed all throughout with drums and an echo added, and it's not the authentic sound of Jack Guthrie. So to get those now, the Bear Family label has issued a couple CDs, which each issues all of his recordings as they were originally made. This was an album that came out in 48. He had died in early 48 of TB, and this featured a number of his fine recordings. So that's what I have for today. And I've enjoyed sharing those with you. And I hope you enjoyed and maybe it awakened your curiosity to investigate a few of these artists and learn more about them. Or if you've heard of them, perhaps it's been able to share a few memories. So thank you for your attention. Thank you for listening. I will look forward to talking to you again. So please take care. Have a good evening, and we'll see you later on. Good night now.